Michael Christopher Koji Fox has become an invaluable part of the Final Fantasy franchise as it has built out during the Square Enix era. After initially joining to work on Final Fantasy XI, he has contributed to Final Fantasy Tactics, specifically the War of the Lions version, and Dirge of Cerberus, but his biggest contributions have come via Final Fantasy XIV and Final Fantasy XVI, with him serving as localization director on the latter project, tasked with adapting the initial Japanese script to work with the innovative English-first approach. His latest endeavour is also related to Final Fantasy XVI. It's a book entitled Logos, The World of Final Fantasy XVI, and it will serve as a comprehensive lore compendium for those who wish to dive deeper into the world of Valisthea. So join us as we pose questions about this very project and many other topics in between. Now that Logos has been announced, what's the response been like from the Final Fantasy XVI community?
So yeah, I've been in London for the past couple of days. So actually when it was announced, I didn't get an announcement, and I got a bunch of messages from friends and fans that know me on social media, and they're like, "Hey Koji, congratulations on the announcement." I'm like, "What announcement?" Like, "Oh, that's right." So yeah, it's still kind of sinking in, but it's finally, I'm really excited to have it finally be announced and I can finally actually talk about it. It's been one of those things where I've really wanted to talk about it for the past year or so, but I haven't been able to, but now I finally can. So thank you for having me and allowing me to talk about the book.
Final Fantasy XVI has been out for over 2 years now. How do you reflect on the experience and the impact it has had on the franchise as a whole?
It was an amazing experience in that it was just the whole development process and working on 16. I'd worked on Final Fantasy XI, I'd worked on Final Fantasy XIV, I'd worked on Final Fantasy VII Dirge of Cerberus. Remember that one? So I had worked on a lot of different projects. And while they're all very different games, the localization process and what I did on the projects had pretty much been the same. I would get more and more responsibility as I moved on. I had different tasks in Final Fantasy XIV compared to the ones that I had in Final Fantasy XI. But Final Fantasy XVI was just, it was something very new in how we approached the game design and approached how localization was involved in the project. And so for me, it opened a lot of doors. It allowed me to do things that I had never done before, like doing the English recording first, attending motion capture, do a lot of script writing and writing quests and writing lore for the game, things that normally I hadn't been able to be a part of or a deep part of, and being given a lot of responsibility and do things kind of in a different way than we've done other games. I think that from a localization perspective, Final Fantasy XVI was a real game changer, not just for me, but I think for Square Enix as well. Whether other projects follow in that path, it's going to depend on the director and the team, but I think we've shown the benefits of doing it this way to not only Square Enix but to the world, and hopefully we get to do that again in the future or even more.
Out of the feedback that's been received about Final Fantasy XVI, is there a particular piece that has stuck with you that will influence how you approach future projects?
I think we've got a lot of feedback about the game, a lot of feedback about the localization, a lot of feedback just about performances and everything in general. But I think the thing that stuck with me the most was that the amount of users that after either playing the demo or seeing the trailers or hearing their friends play about it and them saying, "I think this is going to be the first FF I play in English." And for me, it kind of blew me away, because I get it. The Japanese voices are great. And I also know how the game is made. They're made from the Japanese voices. So of course, all of the lip movements, all of the mocap, everything is going to be based off of the Japanese. And so that original Japanese is going to feel more natural. You can have the best dubs in the world, but it's always going to be a dub of something that already existed in a different sense. And so I can understand players want to play it in the best version. That's not to say that the English versions aren't great. I think our localization team has always done a great job with what they've been given. But with Final Fantasy XVI, us getting the chance to do the English first, and then having, fans recognize the quality that is there and be like, wow, this is actually really good, and I want to play it in English, was, for me, it was kind of like, okay, we did it the right way. And also, that just also reflects the amount of passion and effort that the voice actors put into the project as well. I mean, they brought those characters to life because they got to create those characters in a sense. Ben Starr half created Clive in the studio. I mean, we had an image of what he was going to be, but Ben got to take that and make it into what we know as Clive.
Amongst the community, Active Time Lore was a huge success. Are you able to share who came up with the concept and perhaps, most importantly, how you controlled the scope, as I'm sure you must have been tempted to just keep adding layer after layer of lore?
Yeah, so I think Active Time Lore basically came about, and again, I'm not 100% positive, but I think I've heard this story before, is that once we created a lot of the game, and the director had been following, our progress, Yoshi-P did his first producer check. With Final Fantasy XIV, Yoshi-P is also director, so he's very involved in the development process, and he's there pretty much every step of the way. But with Final Fantasy XVI, because he was only producer, he wasn't as involved in the day-to-day. And we would create these builds, and it would be the director, Takai-san, who was checking all of them. But then we got to a point where we got enough of the game. We're like, okay, we're going to have Yoshi-P do his check. And that was, I think, when we'd finished pretty much all of the main scenario, and he did this playthrough. And one of his biggest points of feedback was that there was a lot of names and a lot of things to remember, and he was getting lost in some spots, I think. And so he requested the team that, okay, you have this rich world with all of this lore and all these names, but it can be overwhelming for some players. And so we need to have something in there that's going to help them. We need to find a system that's going to assist these players. And they threw it back to the dev team. And then Maihiro-san assigned a person on, I think it was the Quest writing team, or it was one of the UI team. I can't remember what team she was on, but it's her name is Momoko Aono. So Aono-san, and she was basically put in charge of creating this system that would feed the lore to the players in a manner that was intuitive but didn't get in the way of the game. And this was what she came up with. She's actually done a couple talks. She did a talk at GDC, I think last year, or maybe the year before, about it. She also did some Asian development conferences. She's talked about creating the Active Time Lore, but so you can probably check those out if you can find them online. But yeah, she created this system, and the problem is that its implementation came in right towards the end of the development process. So it was a matter of, now that the game, we have our quests, we have our main scenario, everything's kind of connected together, and we're going into this wrap-up mode. Oh, we want to add this lore system. And so it wasn't hardcore crunch, but there was a lot of text that was coming in those last few months. And again, as you know, with Active Time Lore, it's not just one entry. It's one entry that changes depending on where you are in the game. So you may have one entry on Reverie before you go to Reverie, an entry on Reverie after you've visited Reverie, and final entry on Reverie after you've defeated the battle, or you finished the battle against Odin. And so you'd have all of these different iterations of them. Everything needed to be coherent, and then it needed to be bug checked. So QA had to check these to make sure that they were firing at the wrong times. And there were tons of bugs where it was saying, oh, this is giving too much information. This information doesn't come out until this cutscene, so you need to have this moved here. And there's a lot of rewriting. And again, all of this is coming right at the end as we're trying to wrap up things, but there's all of this extra thing to translate. And of our non-voiced text in the game, I would think that, yeah, the Active Time Lore was probably about 60–70% of our non-voice text was just that feature. And we had thousands, like 2-some thousand entries, I think, in total at the end. And even then, there were things that were like, oh, can we add this? And they're like, Koji, stop it. So And that's kind of what, like those things that we couldn't talk about in the active time lore, I wanted to flesh out in some manner. And this lore book gave me a chance to take those ideas and those little bits and bobs and kind of, add some more meat to them. And so that players can get a more in-depth type of view into what actually was happening in those things, rather than just a passing, oh, this was a war that happened, 50 years ago. Why did that war happen? Who fought it? What were some major battles in it? Now we can actually get that out in a more, again, fleshed out form.
Can we just say it's nice to see that this book is being given the thorough English treatment, as a lot of the additional lore details are often locked into Japanese exclusive Ultimania guidebooks.
That was, as a fan of Square Enix games for a long time, I always was like, Ultimanias, I wish we could get the Ultimanias. And that was, and for Final Fantasy XVI, they had an Ultimania as well. That said, like the Ultimania though, it was like 700 pages long, but only about 20 pages was lore. The rest of it is walkthrough. And so when I looked at that, I was like, yeah, it would be great to do the Ultimania, but maybe not the whole Ultimania. Maybe we could do just this part. And so that was, when working on Logos, I made it a point to take those 20 pages from the Ultimania, the 16 Ultimania, and make sure that content that was in there, that was exclusive to Japanese players only, or the players that got the Japanese Ultimania only, and make sure that was incorporated into Logos as well. So if you get Logos, you're going to get that little bit that you missed out on in the Ultimania. It's going to be in it.
For Logos, you're working with some of the voice actors and the team at Schlock who served as voice directors on Final Fantasy XVI. What drove the decision to have a more collective author base?
Well, there's, lots of factors. When I was first told that I was able to work on the lore book, I was like, so who's going to be writing it? Who's going to be? I was thinking I was going to be translating it, kind of like we did with the Encyclopedia Eorzea for Final Fantasy XIV. That was mostly Oda-san, the lore creator, was doing most of the writing, and the quest team as well. And then we would do the translation of that. And they're like, no, you're writing it, Koji. I'm like, I'm writing it. And yeah, it's about 250 pages. And the first thing was like, there's no way I can write 250 pages. But as you start writing, like, I could definitely write 250 pages. But that said, Final Fantasy XVI was not just me. It was a collaboration between myself, and then in-house it was John Taylor, who is worked on a lot of the Dragon Quest games. And he was my partner in crime. Final Fantasy XVI wouldn't have happened without his help as well. We did about half each of the main scenario and the text in 16. And so John Taylor was there. The guys from Schlock, they were, again, voice directing. They did editing on Final Fantasy XVI. They also did some translation of, again, the active time lore at the end. There was so much stuff that we had to bring in, and we had them doing some translation and editing on that as well. But also, like I mentioned before, is that those characters, it's like Clive is some of Ben Starr. Ben Starr helped create that character. And that's the same with other characters, such as Dion. Stuart Clark is Dion. Dion is Stuart Clark. Same with Gav and Chris York. They put so much into creating those characters that one of the ideas with this book was not to have it be just a straight encyclopedia like the Encyclopedia Eorzea, but I wanted it to be more, something that represented more than just an encyclopedia. It was more of a voice of the people of Valisthea. And to do that, I thought it would be great to have actual accounts from these characters, letters and journals and diary entries. And I thought, well, rather than me writing those, why not have the actual people that created those characters in the studio bring that voice and write those letters? And so I contacted Ben and was like, hey, would you like to do this? And he was like, oh, that'd be amazing. And so I would give him the seeds, like, I would like you to write some journal entries about these topics. And I gave him about 20 topics, and then let him kind of think what he would write as Clive. And he just put it all out on the page. And we've got some, again, it feels real because it is real in that sense, because Clive is Ben and Ben is Clive. And to give it that sense of, it's a book that's been put together by a lot of different people. The whole concept behind the Logos is that Harpocrates, the lore master, is putting together this history of not only Valisthea, but Clive's time in Valisthea, so that people in future generations can know how he influenced the history of the realm. But he also knows that as a scholar, that it's not just about him. Information comes from everywhere. And so they wanted it to make it not something that, again, like a scholar had written, but more the real true voice of the realm. And to get a real true voice of the realm, you need a lot of different voices from the realm. And rather than having me, just a singular person, do all of those voices, bringing in actual other voices, so you get that variation. So hopefully when reading the text, it will feel like you'll have that, that line in the middle, the Harpocrates voice that should be steady, but then you'll have lots of different stuff. And hopefully, again, it will give it, I think a more exciting feel in that sense, yeah.
In general, for those working on big fantasy projects, are you able to delve a bit deeper into how you work with maintaining lore continuity, especially with a team? And also, can you talk about how it differs when working on an MMO compared to a single-player game?
That's the job. That's the most difficult thing in any project. It was the same thing in Final Fantasy XIV, Final Fantasy XI, is that the bigger the world gets and the more people that work on it, the more chance it has to kind of like deviate and go down weird paths. And you need a person or people in the middle kind of saying, no, you got to rein that in. This is connected to this and this is connected to this. And it's just a matter of being constantly, in that world and keeping your feelers out for anything that feels different, anything that feels off. I think that one of the cool things is, the more you create though, the more real it becomes. And again, then it becomes a little bit easier because there's already so much stuff out there that you can draw from. And you know that this couldn't have happened because this over here had already happened. If we didn't know about this, then this may have happened. And then maybe you do that and then it turns out later that this pops up and like, oh no, that's a plot hole, or we have a knot now that we need to untie. And so the more you create, the more difficult it gets in the fact that you have a lot of information, but it also gets easier because you have all this backup information to help you make sure that things are maintained. But that is seriously one of the jobs. I mean, Oda-san does it on Final Fantasy XIV. I helped him out with that. I had to end up doing it on Final Fantasy XVI. Aono-san as well, who worked on the active time lore, she was in charge of basically maintaining this continuity through it. Because again, it's those little things that end up sticking out and people notice that, like, oh, you said here in the year 862 that Bernard was over here, but in 863 Bernard was, it's like, oh, you're right. Sorry. That happens a lot. And so, yeah, trying to keep it everything in a nice straight line that doesn't kind of go off in weird places is difficult, but it's what you got to do.
Now, you were a big Final Fantasy XI player when the game first came out, and even played the original beta. But what was your main job?
What happened was, so I started playing while I was I did not work for Square Enix. I was just playing as a fan. Got into the beta, and I played, and I had my link shell, and I had all of my groups I would play with, and all of a sudden I get the job at Square Enix, and all of a sudden I can't play with everyone anymore because the company's like, no more public link shells, because if they find out that you're if you're an employee there, then you will have to. I'm like, I don't want to get fired, so I got really scared. My biggest fear was that when a patch would come out, I would know where all of this stuff is. And if they knew I was part of Square, then they would just follow me to make sure that they were doing everything. And I didn't want that to happen. I didn't need to lose this dream job that I had just gotten. And so I ended up having to play solo a lot. But as a lot of FF11 players know, that in the olden days, currently now it's with all of the different systems, you can solo a lot of content in 11. But back in the day, you needed a party of 6 to do anything. You could not solo except for one job, and that was Beastmaster. And so I was a hardcore Beastmaster for the longest time, just because I had to solo a lot. The problem is that when you actually wanted to party, nobody wanted to party up with the Beastmaster. Or if they did party up with you, they'd make you be the one that goes out and uses your pots to get the enemy and bring it back to the camp. And so,
what was it like being part of the pioneering group who figured out that, hey, when you get to level 10, the best way to progress from there is to traverse the Valcom Dunes and party up with a group of strangers?
I mean, I think it was just because everybody was in the same boat. that there's no help there. And I think that was one of the main game design things. I remember talking with like the lore creators back then. It was Iwao-san and with the directors Tanaka-san, and they were like, no, it's all about, you're not supposed to get your information from an NPC. You're supposed to get them from real NPCs, the other players. We're just going to throw out this random quest that's in a random place, but we're not going to tell you where it is. Then basically the people play, somebody stumbles across it, then they tell a friend, then they tell a friend, and then they tell a friend, and then it's like, hey, I heard from a friend, that if you talk to this guy over here and defeat 20 goblins, that you can get this item. And it's just, they kind of set up a real live social network in the game, and that's how all of the information got across. That was a design, that was a feature, not a bug, to Final Fantasy XI. And so because everybody was in that same boat, you were always helped by someone. When you joined the game, someone would always be there to tell you what to do. And when someone does that, you feel good. You're like, wow, this guy, could be out leveling his character or going on some quest, but instead he's decided to help this noob, me, who's out here in the middle of the forest killing rabbits and, dying after, 10 fights and then having his level go down and then having to come back, and he comes up and says, hey, let me help you out. And you're like, well, I have to pay it forward in that sense. Someone helped me, so I want to help the next person that I see as well. And so that was the whole idea, is that people were nice to me, so I'm going to be nice to people, and those people will hopefully be nice to the next person. And it just created this kind of warm community filled with love that I like to think, in a sense, has somewhat transferred over to Final Fantasy XIV. Again, the more players there are, the different, the more different communities are formed, that people are going to play differently, but you still get that kind of warm feeling of wanting to help out your fellow player in Final Fantasy XIV as well. But I mean, that was even more hardcore in Final Fantasy XI, because without that, I mean, nobody knew what to do.
What were some of the biggest challenges you encountered when moving to work from Final Fantasy XI to 14, and then from 14 to 16?
Yeah, well, I mean, there was a lot that I learned on 11 that I was able to carry over to 14. Again, it being an online game with constant updates, that you start working in a cycle. Also, the fact that you can always go back and touch up your text, which is something that I kind of, you take for granted after a while. And then you realize, how much a luxury that is when you move on to an offline game where once it's done, and your mistakes are out there forever, so you have to do it right the first time. So there was that. I think that moving from 14 to 16, while I had experience working on offline games before, I think it was very big to kind of get out of that. We need to get it right the first time, so you have to cross-check and edit and cross-check again and test play and make sure that everything is absolutely perfect before releasing it, because chances are you're not going to get a chance to fix this ever in the future, so it needs to be right the first time. Whereas again, I mean, not to say that like on 14 we were just like, oh, just throw something out there and we can fix it later. It's never like that. But there is always that kind of, well, if it's really bad, then the next patch that comes, we can kind of ninja a text fix in there, and that's okay, because there's always these constant updates. You can't really do that on the offline game, and so having to kind of get into that way of thinking of like, you can fix it later to you can never fix it, was probably the biggest thing for me on 14. There's, I mean, a lot of other things as well, but that's one thing that was the major difference between working on an online game and an offline game. But yeah. And now I'm going backwards, 11 to 14. I don't think there was too much of a difference in what I was doing, but just the approach to how to make a game with the 11 team, as opposed to Yoshipi's style in 14. The Tanaka-san style of 11 to the Yoshipi style in 14, that was the biggest thing. Just having directors who are both great directors, but have completely different ways of thinking of, how this game should be, what this game is for, what the relationship with the player should be. And kind of learning, once Tanaka-san left and Yoshipi coming in, and learning again, okay, it's the same. I'm still working on 14, but it's no longer the 14 that I knew. I need to learn a new set of skills, a new set of what I should be focusing on, and how to interact with the community. And that's just like the director style. So that was probably the biggest jump. I mean, I love working with both Tanaka-san and Yoshida-san for completely different reasons. But again, having to learn, what is going to make Yoshida-san happy was different than what was going to make Tanaka-san happy.
Now that you've finished writing Logos, what are your hopes for the book?
It can help, keep that Final Fantasy XVI vibe going. I mean, the biggest thing especially in this day and age, especially with an offline game, is that, and there's so many games out there that you play a game and you can love it, you can hate it, you can kind of go, but it doesn't matter because next week there's 100 new games coming out on Steam, 50 new games coming out on Switch or PlayStation, and you go to the next game, and then you go to the next game. And a lot of people are playing, 10s, 20s, hundreds of games a year, and so it kind of just gets buried. And while it was a great experience, you've moved on. So hopefully this book can remind people of those memories that they had created while playing Final Fantasy XVI. Everyone probably has, the first time they see certain scenes, the first time they lose certain characters in the game or fight certain battles, they created these type of emotional memories that are still in there. But because they've been playing, all these other games, maybe they're buried down there. And hopefully with this book, it will bring those things up again, that they will hear Ascension play in their head and they'll see Bahamut and Ifrit risen up there. And it will be, it will bring back all that love, but then it will maybe give people a reason to go back and maybe try and play it again, because there's a lot of information in here that supplements what happened in the book. Or what happened in the game. And so that maybe after reading the book, we're like, oh, maybe that's what that meant. Go back and play the game with this new information there as a background. Will give players a different perspective. But yeah, hopefully we'll see our Steam numbers go up a little bit after the release of the book, because everybody's going back to play it and see, so maybe that's what Sid was thinking at that time.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. And you're not going to say anything about the bouncy ball. You're just going to not say anything at all and just, okay, perfect.